ahead and introduce our speaker for today. And it's such a pleasure to be able to do that. And I actually had the chance to attend Dr. Sabuhoro's talk that was given by the College of HHD a few weeks ago, and that was just phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to getting the chance to hear again and more from you, Edwin. So without further ado, let me just let everyone in the audience know a little bit about Dr. Sabuhoro, whose education has taken place across 3 different continents. He earned his PhD in Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at Clemson University, his master's in Conservation and Tourism at the University of Kent in the UK, and a law degree at the University of Rwanda. His research focuses on national parks and protected areas, conservation area management, human and wildlife coexistence, and the impacts of tourism on biodiversity conservation and community development. His work to develop tourism, to reduce poaching, and to set up community-based ecotourism projects for local communities and ex-poachers at the Volcanoes National Park in Rwanda has been widely recognized and won several prestigious awards, including the Rwandan Prime Minister's Award of Excellence. He also featured on CNN's African Voices and was nominated as a CNN hero in 2015. And if anyone wants to Google that afterwards and see a fantastic video in which you can see all the places, hopefully Edwin will be talking about with us in greater detail today, I recommend that because some really, really great stuff on there. So without further ado, let me now turn the table over to you, Edwin, and if everyone has any questions, please just place them in the chat and we will come to that at the end.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let me share my screen and then I can take you to my presentation. My presentation is exciting and interesting. It has always been interesting for me to see poachers dance. So it's around the dancing poachers, but telling a story about the mountain gorillas conservation and the community development in Rwanda, a program that I've been involved in for over 15 years. And I've worked across Uganda, Rwanda, and the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, but in particular around the Virunga. So most of the work, the Virunga is in the middle of Africa. We like to call it the heart of Africa. That's in the East Africa. And it shares, the landscape shares across the border of Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda. And that's where the ecosystem of mountain gorillas are and where exist only in the whole world. So it's a high value ecosystem. It's a land that has been also on the other side of it faced a lot of turmoil and conflicts. If you've been following up with most coming from the area, but the landscape itself is registered as one of the hotspot for critical endangered species and has been really highly regarded because of the mountain gorillas. Two of the contradictory episode that you watch, mostly the gorillas in the mist by Diane Fossey, that brought this area to the limelight. She did a lot of work to preserve the mountain gorillas, and her work has carried on to today. And recently there's been a documentary about the Virunga, the crisis happening in the Congo. So both of these, the documentary and the movie, really gives a limelight about this highly important area in the region. But the place is also regarded as a place that you must visit before you die. So I'm just throwing it out there that don't be asked that you were never told, but also considered as one of the unforgettable journeys you must take before you die. So two things at a go that I would want to invite you to visit the East Africa, but in particular the mountain gorillas and the landscape. Not only people go to see the mountain gorillas, they go to see other variety of wildlife and the experiences they get. And this varies across the East Africa. And people get these different varieties of experiences with elephants, with the primates, different experiences that people go for. And in particular in Rwanda, there is also an element of art and culture. And art has been part of our traditional culture, and it's all surrounded around our cows. So we take our cows as pristine, but also divine. So that has been also part of the unique culture in Africa that attracts people to see what that means to people and the country. But also, there's also hotspots for hospitality, high-end. People come from all over the world to come and rest. Recently has been attracting Hollywood. Some places cost as much as $2,300 a night a person. So you can imagine how much that's bringing in. And we also have places where people are paying $5,000 per person per night. So you can see it's just making it as a high-end experience, people coming for the mountain gorillas because there's nowhere else apart from the region that you can see them. So Recent has developed to that high end that attracts people from all over the world. And these experiences, they just come to rest, come to take a time off. They fly in and fly out and stay in the Virunga. And that has given people a wide array of experiences that they attract them and they come for. But even on that, in terms of hospitality, they are seeing the mountain gorillas has been regarded as one of the expensive tourism products in the world. People paying $1,500 per person per hour pre-COVID. And people had to book almost a year in advance to get a place. So with over 10 groups of gorillas, 8 people per day, people paying a lot of money to come and have that once in a lifetime experience. So on plus the flights, hotels, accommodation, and the $1,500 that you pay that goes to the government for you to be able to see the gorillas. So what did that do over the years? Has really increased the revenue base from when we started after the genocide on a zero. It has gone up to generating over, $600, $400, $500 million. And from just the Volcanoes National Park, just to see the gorillas, you can see a range, that we moved from almost $1 million to $19 million a year. So that's how lucrative that tourism business, the mountain gorilla, is, and has also formed a bigger part of the tourism base in the country. And when we started, tourism was nowhere, and it's now one of the top foreign exchange earner for the country. It has surpassed agriculture, surpassed mining and everything. And now pre-COVID, prior to COVID, has been really one of the sector that was holding the country together. But as we see that development of tourism revenues coming in and creating, jobs and infrastructure and development, inside the park, there was a different story. I, throughout my career, happened to work in all the parks. I worked in all the parks in Rwanda, but my favorite was working with the mountain gorillas. So as a ranger and later on as a warden for tourism, I was, charged to enforce the laws to make sure that the gorillas are protected. And that's what we did to boost the tourism trade. But inside the park, we had a lot of trouble keeping up with protecting the mountain gorillas. So every time we came, we found a lot of snares, gorillas killed. And as rangers, like my staff, I had over 300 rangers just to protect the gorillas, to make sure that the gorillas are not killed or are not caught in snares. But every time we failed because we found them in snares. This is one of the best pictures, my best friend, a silverback, showing me a wound in his foot. And that really touched me and hurt me so much because he was wondering, what are you guys doing? Every time you're throwing snares. And that's a picture of a baby gorilla that was poached in 2004 that I helped to rescue when I disguised as a potential buyer from Kenya and going to buy the baby from these poachers. And to get a baby, you have to kill more than 4 big gorillas because they are very protective. So at that time, I felt that I had failed my work, my responsibility, because I could not protect the gorillas to that extent, and kept wondering, why are we having success on the tourism side, but we are failing on the conservation side? We are losing the same product that is attracting all these tourists to come and see and contributing that much to the Rwandan economy. Even on losing the gorillas, the park was encroached. If you see on my right-hand side picture, we had a lot of encroachment. So the population was moving up, looking for taking more of the parkland. Even on that, they were also going into the park to set snares, to harvest honey, put in beehives, and using local methods of honey correction. And that sets the forest on fire. And every time we were in the forest to remove snares, to remove all these traps that were set, which was dangerous because at the time we were also losing rangers who were caught in some of these snares that are targeting elephants, targeting buffaloes, targeting gorillas, that if you don't watch out, they will kill you right instantly. But also we had threats from the community. who were not happy and amused because we are removing their snares. So we are standing between their meal that they are looking for and the gorillas. So, but that was part of our work. So we spent the whole time trying to remove the snares. And that was problematic because we didn't have enough staff to do that on a daily. And we couldn't ensure that wherever the gorillas walk to or move around, they weren't caught in the snares. So over the years, we had, the gorillas stock population moving down ground. And by 80s, actually, science had predicted that the gorillas would be, wiped out on the face of the planet. So we are working with a population that was crashing, going down, and we're now with increasing, demand for, for tourism. People wanted to see the gorillas before they are wiped out on the planet. They wanted to come and see that and have a chance to, to know that I saw the mountain gorillas before they went extinct. So we are working around the Virunga landscape with a small population of gorillas that were targeted, that were falling into snares, and they were not trying to survive, but also the parkland, the other activities. People are looking for bamboo, harvesting medicine, looking for different types of food. So not only the gorillas, their landscape, and also the resources in the park that form part of the food chain. So my question was, what's causing all this? As a young ranger, as a young warden, trying to develop tourism, trying to protect their product, the gorillas, I started wondering what's causing all this. What are we failing to do, and what are we not doing? So I set out on a journey to find out. After I did my studies in conservation and tourism, my master's degree, I started now doing research, trying to talk to communities to find out what's causing that. Why are you killing the gorillas? Why are you poaching? Do you understand about that? So I went out to talk to communities and ask them and find out and see what's causing all this and what's happening in the villages. And what happened, I spent over 6 months. I was staying in the communities, living with them. That was the house I was staying in. And they were talking to women, finding out what's happening around their homestead and the backyard. And for me to understand what was happening inside the park, because that one I knew, they were killing gorillas, they were poaching, they were hunting. So now I wanted to know what was happening outside. What do they understand about the gorillas? What do they mean to them? What does tourism mean to them? Because us as park rangers or park staff, we knew what gorillas meant. The government knew because they were getting a lot of money. So I wanted to know what the communities think about these gorillas. So I interacted with them. I went to, we have a population called the pygmies, and interacted with the pygmies, who are really serial poachers around the park, to understand how they poach, what they poach, and why they poach. And also interacted with the farmers to look at the wildlife conflicts around the park. So I entered deep into understanding the community, and I was shocked as a person, because then I felt ashamed, because while working as a ranger, I even didn't know the community that was around the park. So here I was enforcing the laws, trying to stop communities from doing whatever they were doing, mostly poaching and hunting. But during these studies, I found out that most of them were looking for ways to survive. They were looking for bushmeat to eat. They wanted to feed their families. They were starving to death. So, and most of them wondered and asked me aloud, what would you do if you are here in our land, you're not benefiting from tourism, you're starving to death, you have your children, so would you go and poach in the park? Would you go, if somebody gave you money to go and kill gorillas and get a baby, would you do that? Or would you let your children starve to death? Because that's an opportunity for us. So that really touched me, because I felt, one, I would do that immediately. And the question again was, if you're not paid to do the job, you earn money, you take it home, you contribute to your livelihoods in your family, would you do it? So I found out that I was doing much that to protect where my mouth was. So that's it. And I realized that if we don't find a way, then it's going to be hard, because their livelihood is based on food, on livelihood needs that they have for them to survive. And that was more or less subsistence. So I realized in that whole journey of talking to them that it touched me, not only what I was seeing, but it also took me back to my own challenges and life while growing up, and realized that some of what they are facing is the same that I faced when I was growing up as a refugee in Uganda after my parents were forced out of the country and wanted to be killed because of who they were. And they ended up living in exile, and we lived in a refugee camp. And I remembered when I was visiting them and seeing the horrors of poverty and what they're going through, that also was the same as what I was going through. And also took me through, the hell of wars that we went through, one that depicted in The Last King of Scotland with Idi Amin in Uganda, and later on the genocide in Rwanda. So it really took me to that time in history that I never wanted to go back to. But it showed me that whatever the challenges the communities are going through is the same that I was going through when I was young. It reminded me of my own struggles as a child, and growing up bitter, faced with life, trying to understand, why are we poor and why are others rich? Why am I expelled out of school? I can't go to school because my mom, my single mother, I grew up with a single mother, could not afford. Why she was mistreated in the community. And the only house that we had that is there in the picture, the photo, was falling down every time I went to. And that's I like to joke about the house. That's when I fell in love with nature, because in that house we had lizards, we had snakes, birds came in, we had mosquitoes, we had, jiggers and everything. So that's what drew me to nature, because in that I had interaction with nature, and that's how I loved nature. I like to tell a joke about that. But the only house that we had, when it rained, it went through. When it did it was falling apart. So visiting the community, seeing what they were going through, really touched my heart, and I felt that I needed to do something. And what I did, I resigned my job, I left my career, and set up a tent in the community to start my journey of working with the community. And in that tent, I spent a whole year around the Virunga, the volcanoes, working with the communities, trying to talk to them, understanding them, and became part of the community. And what that do, I ended up now starting organizing the community, bring them together in cooperatives, and talking to them to figure out, what can we do? This is the challenges that we are facing, but what is it that we can do to solve the challenges that we're having? So most of these were poachers who were killing wildlife. They came to talk to me, and figured out that. And what I did was to organize now workshops and groups to talk with park staff, the managers, to talk with government officials, and figure out, what can we do? So I quickly realized that if I take that route, nothing is going to happen. So I took the route of where I am. I started my own program of working with the community. And the only, what I had was a computer. So that's what I used to start training communities. But every time I had a training, you can see I had a lot of people coming to just learn from that small computer, and it was very hard. So I structured it to start teaching the youth, men, women in different programs, for us to start figuring out what we do. So one of the things I started was turning poachers to farmers in 2006. And the idea with that was that if we grow and have food, that will help us to combat the food insecurities in our communities that I witnessed. So I rented out land around the village and gave it to the community, and we started farming. And they were not farming alone. I was with them every day. So I would go there, document how long, how much we have farmed, what we have covered, what we have put in, document that, and go back. And in 6 months, our farms were harvesting, had enough taking home, but also had reserves that were taking on the market to sell. So that demonstrated to me that if we invest more in farming, that will help to cut down food insecurity, and that will affect the park. So as we did that, I realized that in the afternoon, we don't have anything to do. So I started a program of community enterprise development, but mostly to do with crafts. The idea with that was that we have tourists who are coming to see the gorillas. If we do gorilla carvings, maybe they will buy that and take it home. So the money that the communities are willing to kill the gorillas for, we'll generate it from the enterprise that we start. So I started putting women together to start crafts. And much of this, the knowledge they had, it was just a matter of bringing them together to start making baskets that we can sell, and training youth, instead of being loitering and not having anything to do, to start making crafts that they can sell on the market. But what was surprising most, that I like to call dancing poachers, is that every time we did the activity, we are celebrating around dancing, because part of our culture is centered on music and dancing. So I realized that these poachers can actually dance. So how about we get poachers to dance for the tourists? So we started training, and every time we had a program, we started dancing around there. You know, folk art, storytelling, dancing, campfire, getting children, women, men dancing. So what we ended up doing, we ended up getting a troupe to dance for the tourists. And I went to talk to the tourists. They were willing to spend at least $50 to learn about the culture. And I found out that after tracking, they don't have anything to do. There's no interaction with the community. And they were willing to pay for it, and they want something like that. So I figured out that if we have 80 to 100 tourists paying $50 or less, that's a lot of money that would help to change the community. So what we did, we started building the culture village, put together the team, and building the houses. The idea was to have a center that can bring the community together, that we can celebrate our success in farming and the activities that we are doing, but it can also become an educative center for the community to address the challenges that we are facing. But the main target was to have a culture center where the tourists can come to view, to see, to take part in our day-to-day activities. Before we finished building, the idea was to build King's Palace. These are palaces that we still have. And this was originally the area where the knowledge of building King's Palaces came from in Rwanda. So we started bringing that together, getting all people together to give us the knowledge, transfer it to young people, and we started building the culture village and the King's House. Before we finished, we started getting people to coming to see, to learn, to hear, and to see our dances, and to getting the poachers to tell the story. In the end, every evening, all the communities gathered at the culture village. So we use that as a ground to educate the communities about conservation, to talk about family planning, to talk about health issues, to talk about education, and to start getting the children, women, men, to start looking at these issues in depth. So as we got tourists now, communities started to understand the importance of the guerrillas, because these people would not come if it wasn't for the guerrillas. So they started interacting with the communities. And the tourists started understanding that for the guerrillas to be here, we need to work with the communities. We need to give back to the community for them to protect the guerrillas. So they started coming, wanting to stay in our village, seeing the traditional medicine man, learning about the culture of what we are doing. And what we did was to build and open up our culture center. And in between there, we started getting people to coming for these experiences. And some of those experiences, they wanted to learn how to cook the traditional food. They wanted how to grind a traditional millet. And they are paying $10 for each experience that they take part in. And that money goes to the community fund. But we also gave more than that. We had a program where you can be a king and a queen for a day. And that program has taken off up to today. We still have people coming just for that experience. So people started coming in the area, not only for the guerrillas, but for the community program experiences, making baskets, taking part in that, and then you buy it and take it home. So it's not only a basket that you're buying, but you have taken part in that. You have the story from the person who is teaching you and working with you, and you take that home. And we started getting schools from Europe, from UK, bring students to come and learn from these experiences, staying there, taking part in blacksmith, learning about traditional dances, cooking. You can cook your own food, pay for it, and money goes to the community fund. But more than that, people wanted to learn the traditional warrior dance. And this takes 5 days for you to learn how to dance. So people get to stay longer in the community, spend more in the community, and that money goes to the community fund. And by end of 5 days, then you are a Rwandan warrior and you have a certificate that you take home. So people started coming, and we started having a lot of people coming with an interest to learn that and take home. Beyond that, the Rwandan themselves, it became a model to rebuild the culture, to have trust, to have love for the culture. So we started getting Rwandan people coming around from the countryside, coming to learn about their own culture in their own country. And that helped us to see that people to put a value tag on their culture and take part in that. For example, traditional weddings, the king, being a king and a queen, and taking part in all those ceremonies that we did. Beyond that, our own president came also to the culture village to visit the program, because what happened is he started hearing about this and he didn't know what was taking place in his own country. So he ended up taking a trip to come and see the dancing poachers and take part in the cultural programs in the village. This is one of the serial poacher who had killed over 10 gorillas, 20 elephants and rhinos, and buffaloes. So when he started educating and teaching others to stop poaching, everyone was listening to him because he was a serial poacher before. So when he became a dancer, so everyone wanted to be a dancer or the poachers. And that's how the cultural village now became popular and helped to curb down illegal activities. More than that, people started wanting to stay in the cultural village. So what we did was to build accommodation facilities, not to pay the $1,500 or $2,300. Somebody pays $100 and stays in the cultural village, and that money goes to the community fund. So people started staying, going for campfire, extending for 5 days, staying more, and getting students who are coming to stay for 3 months to do research in their capstone projects. And that helped the community to interact, but also to understand that if we don't protect the park and the gorillas, then all these programs that we have won't survive. So what did that do? We started getting more money into the community. From the tourism that was generated at the country level, we got what we call revenue sharing. The government started sharing 5% of the tourism revenues back to the communities around the parks and protected area. So that increased the amount of money that communities got from that. Two, from the enterprises, we were generating also a lot of money from community lodges, from cultural villages, and craft centers. And what was interesting in that was that it was empowering more of women than men, because they were getting all this money more from the craft centers and community lodges. And that helps for us. What we did was to create a system where we go back to figure out what are you doing with the money, to make sure that there's no room for waste. But in all that, what I did was to boost the food security around there, to make sure that communities have food. And what we did was to start a project called Goats for Gorillas. So for every tourist coming to the village or the park gives a goat, and that goes to the poacher's family. So in case where they want to have meat, to sell a goat for something, whatever they have with their family, then they have an opportunity to do that. And then we start rearing goats, chickens, and all that, in a way that if we have to curb down bush meat hunting, we have to raise opportunities for communities to have meat, or to have a chance to have meat and their families. From studying outside in trees, from revenue sharing money and the money we got, we were able to build schools around the community, schools where our children can go and study from. And that helped because we started now getting more kids coming into the school programs and started educating their parents the importance of sending the kids to school. This was very important to me because when I was a child, I struggled a lot. I fought a lot to have an access to education. As a refugee, I was not allowed to go to school in Uganda. So I had to disguise as a local to go into school. Every time I would be arrested and chased, I would find a way to come back. So one of the things that I made sure that we do is to make sure that children in our village have opportunities to have access to education. Water was also another problem that we had in the community that was causing a lot of problems, because we had health issues. People were getting water from contaminated sources, and in the caves where we had bad droppings and really, really bad water. So what we did was, that every community can have at least 2 jerrycans a day of clean water that they can take home. And that helped us because we're getting a lot of diseases out in the community, had a lot of challenges, and that dropped down for communities to have access to clean water. And the idea with that also, we use it as a center to educate the communities that if we don't have health gorillas, then we won't have health people. If we don't have health people, then we won't have the gorillas as well as healthy. Our enterprises that we started at small scale grew, from over 500 women weaving and taking part in these materials. And we started using this as an education center to other cooperative or community members on how they can do more around the parks, but also how this has changed and helped the communities. And all the tourists were buying T-shirts, buying baskets, buying gorilla carvings, per tourist, the estimate now that we had prior to COVID was they were spending almost $200 from their visit per day, from mere $20 that when we started to between $100 and $200 buying crafts and materials that they take home. And that we made sure that every tourist who comes is able to buy a t-shirt from the family they visit. We put the names, we brand the t-shirts and we sell them. These are some of the crafts, the material and the women that they sell, the enterprises. But even on that, we also started making our own uniforms in the villages, our own women making uniforms that they sell. So even if their parents can't afford, they will get and pay in installments when they sell their yield, agricultural yield over time. And the youth also generate that money. They have an enterprise and a program after when they drop out of school on what they can do. So what did all this do? It helped to increase the gorilla population. The last time we had a gorilla death through poaching was in 2004, the one I rescued. And that was the last time we had any gorilla death in the park. So the numbers went up to the last, we started celebrating the return of the mountain gorillas. Across the Virunga, we have over 1,000 population of gorillas. So you can imagine coming down from 300 to 600 in the park. That's a huge milestone for us because that means the population is growing. And now the discussion has changed to increasing the habitat. And that discussion is coming from the community themselves. And what can we do to protect our gorillas? So the talk changed from fighting when I went back to talk to the communities mostly is talking to our gorillas, our park. Before the retaliation was their gorillas, their park, referring to the government. Now it has changed to our government, our gorillas, our own parks that we protect. So what does that do? One is the intersection of communities and the gorillas. So for the gorillas to thrive, take care of the young ones, we have to make sure that the communities thrive and they take care of the young ones. If we don't have, then it's going to be difficult for them to do. And that's what we see now, that the interplay is helping the two to coexist in the same landscape. And what has that done? That has inspired around the country and the region, these poachers to tell their stories about the successes they're having in their livelihoods, in the enterprises, in what they're doing, but also in conservation. So we use this as a backstory to help other parks and protected areas on how they can reduce human-wildlife conflict. And until we have these communities taking part in the management, ensuring that the park belongs to them, that's how the behavior will change. So what are the processes? How did we go through that behavior change? And what has been their perception over time? And how can we use that to help other parks and protected areas around East Africa and other countries in the region? So what has happened now, we get students coming from over the country, spending more time. We have programs here in the US, for example, at Colorado State University, Clemson, Oregon. We're trying to build that at Penn State here, who go there to study about this intersection of interdevelopment and conservation. How integrated can these programs be? What are the challenges still remaining? What is happening right now? Even when we thought we're at the peak of the success, then we had the pandemic. So right now, tourism is on a standstill. So what happens after? Because the tourism now is out of the equation. The success was built around tourism. So we continue to start to get people to come as students, researchers, to come and look deeply into some of these programs and see what else can we do when such cases like a pandemic happens, that communities don't go back into poaching. So the community the center has become a platform for students all around the country beyond to come and learn about this and see how they can take part in the processes of building their own communities in different areas. But the building never stops. So we continue to go into to build. But for us to be able to take over the challenges or take into that, protect the mountain gorillas and their families, protect the communities and their families, we have to make sure that we go beyond the normal traditional way of doing things. That means we have to be willing to step in mud, to build, to take part in that, and be involved in making sure that we get the ideas. And the best ideas we're going to get them when we take part in that, get out of our comfort zone and be able to get this from the community. So that's how the population of mountain gorillas and other wildlife, iconic wildlife species that we have in the region, like rhinos facing extinction, like giraffes, and pangolins that are facing extinction in the region because of poaching, are going to really have a turnaround only if the communities around them benefit from tourism, they have enough incentives and are seeing the opportunities as they coming from protection of this wildlife. But on a personal level, that helped me to grow. And in 2010, I was invited by President Obama to the White House as a young African leader. And I was able to meet other young African leaders and did learn a lot from them on how to give back to my community, how to take part in that. But at the time when I was feeling a little bit fatigued with that, I was really encouraged more by not only President Obama, but also other young African leaders on the incredible work that they are doing around the continent. And we went on to share ideas, make linkages, network, and build a program of young African leaders on how we can really better our communities and give back to our countries. And along the way, the program has been picked and the ideas around to build in other areas, in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania. I've had opportunities to share with other countries across the continent on how they can build similar programs to help cut down illegal activities, improve their livelihoods, but also make an impact in the community. So I engaged in a program called Mentoring Young African Leaders to start getting these kind of programs, get people off to go into their communities and figure out, find solutions on how they can change the communities. And that has been helped, rewarded, acknowledged in different ways. Among them is IUCN, the CNN Heroes, and others, to see how to inspire the other young Africans to go into building their communities at a time. So for gorillas to thrive, we have to take it back into our homes and the families, and also put that into the hands of young people. And that's something that I'm engaged in and continue to do research, to find out more, to see what more we can do, in not only in Rwanda, also in other areas, in Congo, in Uganda, and the region, but also how can we equip the young people in schools, in our homes, with these materials and information that they need. Because for us to pass on the torch, we have to make sure that they are ready. If not, then the gorillas and the babies and the young ones cannot thrive. So the interlinkage, the linkages and connection of gorillas and the people will be the only model that will save the gorillas. And in the end, will save the people in the region. So thank you. We can have interaction. I wanted to share that with you. And let me stop my sharing screen here, and then we can have a discussion around that. Thank you. I hope I haven't taken too long.
That was fantastic. No, you were perfectly on time, and that was just such a really inspiring and rich and amazing presentation in terms of the way you structured it with your images and the way you interwove your story and shared with us so much across these different levels of your life and all the way up to the international level and meeting multiple presidents, Obama, Kagame. So I guess while everyone else maybe takes a second to think of some questions, and if you want to post them in the chat, I can then read it, or you guys, we all know you could just ask Edwin yourself. But I can start, and that is one thing, Edwin, that struck me around everything that you've done. There's so much to ask you, but was that slide that you showed us where you suggested turning poachers to dancers and to entrepreneurs. And it struck me the power of language and of labels and how that matters. And so I thought of your experience with this, and I wondered if maybe you could share with us what it might have been like in those initial phases for you as you began this work, and the labels people had attached to you as a ranger and as then a researcher, and your own connection as a refugee, and so I wondered about how you navigated those kinds of labels sort of yourself and what they made of you, even as you were transforming your own thinking of them from poachers to other categories. And just if you could share a little bit more of that experience, I would love to know more about that.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. when I was working in the park as a ranger, we saw the community as the enemy. And they saw us as the rangers as the enemy. So we are seeing them as the enemy of our park and the gorillas. They saw us as the enemy who was stopping them from their livelihoods, from their survival. And we never knew that. So we didn't know why they call us the enemy for, and they never knew why we were calling them for. So when I was visiting them and talking to them, they kept referring at the rangers as the enemy. They don't want us to survive. They want us to die. And that was not the case. We didn't want them to die. And we also knew that if we don't look carefully, they will kill us. So you can imagine both of us were now locked in a way that we don't like each other, we hate each other, we fight each other. Because every time my boss would hear that there was a snare, I'd be caught, then I wasn't doing my job. So what I was doing, my rangers shoot on sight. If we see a poacher, we just shoot because we need arrest and take them to court. So I remember the first time I was working in another park that I took a poacher to the police. The policeman told me, is killing a gorilla, a monkey a problem? I said, yes, it's a problem. It's here. The constitution is here. The law is here. It says this. I was, young, energetic. I was a lawyer. I had all my laws. He said, young man, I have people who have killed people here. This is not a problem. Let them kill more. So that's when I realized that law enforcement is going to be hard, because in the country we are dealing with other major issues, that a gorilla is seen as a monkey. A policeman doesn't understand why killing a gorilla or a monkey is of importance. So in the park, enforcing the law, we had to make sure that the community is either shot or killed, if they don't kill us anyway, because they're armed as well. And during the time, we also lost rangers. We continue to lose rangers in the Congo up to today, a lot of rangers. So when I was talking to them, that's why I spent more than a year living with them, was to earn their trust. Because so I started seeing how it was changing from referring to me as the ranger, and it just started changing. In the village, they call me the gorilla man, the chief or the gorilla man. So they started referring, oh, the gorilla man was here, the gorilla man has passed here. So they started seeing me as a human being who loves the gorillas. And they started, oh, beyond that is chief or the gorilla man. So I would just say, oh, the gorilla man, because they knew I was talking about the gorillas. So I was no longer a ranger. So the more I stayed with them, sitting down and eating with them, humanizing them, because, the word humanize them, and trying to make sure they are people, and I'm also, a more human being. So we started now getting to know each other. But two, which is interesting there on a different culture perspective, we are from a different culture distinctions. I'm a Tutsi and they are Hutu. So we started now breaking the gap and bringing the bond together. So it was no longer a Tutsi, a Hutu. We are people around the community. We started hugging each other, loving each other, slept there. And people wondered, were shocked to see that changing. So we started changing not only the brand and the labels that we had, we started challenging the cultural connotation that we had around who we are and what we mean to each other. And people started opening up. Oh, they told me this, all these things that about the rangers, about Hutus, about Tutsis, so we started having discussions, talking, laughing, sharing drinks, beer, campfire, and that changed. And that's what brought us to dancing. Every time we had all that, we started dancing. And that's how I coined the level of turning poachers to dancers. But how those shrunk was when the changes of access to benefits were coming in, seeing that it's not, these people are trying to survive, are trying to feed their families. And we started now getting the communities, educating the park managers about communities. And we started getting the park managers telling their stories to the communities. So they started now getting together, oh, we actually didn't know each other. We are trying to do the same things. We want the same things. We are human beings. So that helped us to have a discussion. We call actually that conversations on conservation. And those conversations helped a lot to remove the labels, the barriers that existed, and helping people to come together. And we ended up having the communities doing more ranger work than the rangers. And they volunteered to do that. So they started we had, gorillas come out of the park, or buffaloes or elephants, They were not running with the machetes to kill them. They were getting the drums to drum and have them back to the park. And that, for me, that was a successful story, to see that happen in a community where there's no ranger, no policeman. The communities come up and escort these gorillas or elephants back to the park. Was phenomenal for me. So that helped. That's how those levels and name calling and structures changed over time.
That's such a beautiful answer. It's so detailed and rich, and I really took away, I think, the listening on both sides. It's labels, but it's listening to break them down.
Including myself. I mean,
yeah.
Listening is one thing that we don't do in most of the development programs, is that we have preconceived notions of what we think is going to help the community. Exactly. You have the program, this idea, and that's it. Let's go in the first. What I was just listening to the community and then bring the ideas into play.
Amazing. All right. Well, speaking of listening, I will now listen to, we have a few questions. So let me, if I recall, I think Bronwyn, you had your hand up first. So go for it, Bronwyn.
Thanks. Edwin, I have, firstly, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. It's really nice to hear about your work. I have many questions, but I'll stick to one. I'm really curious, this summer, especially, there was a news story about abuse by rangers in the DRC, and WWF took a lot of criticism because those rangers are in part paid through WWF. Also, we see stories that Diana Fossey used to torture community members to extract information about who is poaching. Yeah. And so then there's a whole discussion around the neo-colonial nature of conservation in general, conservation priorities, and who bears the burden of those conservation priorities globally. So I'm curious what your take on those news stories are, and how you and your communities there have navigated preventing that and maybe healing some of those damages that have been done.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's an interesting question. One of the races, if you watch the Virunga, you will see when they said conservation is war. And I can say also development is war. What's happening previously, when you look at, for example, the Anfosi and earlier on conservation is not our thing. If I say our thing, is not our own way of doing things. So it's just coming from the colonial way of doing things. This is a protected area. It's a hunting ground for the king, for the queen, for the colonial masters. So from today, this is a park. That means people are taken out of that. That's how national parks were born in Africa. They're out of that people get out. People who were, like, for example, in the Virunga, we had the pygmies who lived there, who hunted. They were no longer able to do that. It's a national park. They are pushed outside. So as colonialists left, they left these spaces, interesting spaces, and branded them as protected areas, national parks, for their own good, for their own leisure, for their own recreation, for harvesting, hunting. And that's how they have been over the years. So from the beginning, they didn't have a good taste within the communities. So that's how human-wildlife conflicts were born, because these communities still wanted to go inside the park because they are sacred places. They wanted to go to the parks because that's how they hunted for years and generations. So now they are no longer allowed to do that. It is illegal. So now it's called poaching. For them, it's hunting. So they feel I still have rights to hunt, to access the land, according to my culture, beliefs, and backgrounds. So you can see now the conflict right there of that. So when Diana Fossey and others came, and thanks to her, if it hadn't been Diana Fossey, we wouldn't be having gorillas now. Her model was combative and protective, because you had all these communities still wanting to go into the park and kill wildlife and hunt. And because they are doing it illegally now, they do it in a legal way. That means they destroy to get to run away. And then you had governments at the time who did not understand the importance of the gorillas. If you read in her book, the movie Gorillas in the Mist, you see her talking about these people who are killing gorillas in future will kill their own. And that's what happened years later, because the government didn't care about the gorillas. They gave away the land to grow pyrethrum, and they are willing to give all the gorillas away at a cost. And she was protecting that from happening. So that's to your question, that's what was happening with Dian Fossey. And there was no such a thing as tourism at the time. So the only way she had was to be combative to stop that. Come back to today in the Congo, we still are losing rangers at a high rate. It's just heartbreaking to see that happen every time. Why? We have all the militias you can talk about are in the Congo, in that period, part of the world. All the interest groups for all these minerals you can talk about are in that part of the world. All the politicians and investor interests are there. So it has been problematic in a way to manage that land, because all these investors, all these warlords, all these militias are in the same place. So it's hard to protect the park, and has been hard for the Congolese government and in the region to make sure that happens. So that's why you see in that space, even now, it's very hard. And it was also harder for me in these programs. It wasn't as thorough as I'm presenting, talking about now. There was a time when my life was also in danger. I was threatened to stop the project, and or I would be harmed or killed at some point. Why? Because in some of the development organizations, it's not seen as good doing the work that I was doing in conservation and community development. Because in one way or another, if the problem is not there, then the development organization will lose the job. Then they don't have a platform to look for grants and money and to put back. Not that they have not done good, a lot has been done, but why we don't have success or ways of doing things is that sometimes they let the problem continue or even create one. So I saw at a time where they would come, development organization would come to tell the communities that this was a bad idea. My own conservation program or boss previously was against the same idea, against me. So for her, I was that ranger. How can a mere ranger or Edwin or somebody achieve this? It should be me. And we had a conflict. I had a conflict with my prior boss, but thank God I had left her program. I was no longer her staff. So you can see that there's a constraint in development in organization, community conservation organizations. Even those conservation organizations, they don't work together. One conservation organization and the other in the same spot, you find 5 doing the same things. Why? So they start fighting in fight all the time. So that's why you see the challenges that you're talking about in conservation programs in parks and protected areas in the Congo that you see have gone on again and again for generations. And I don't know when that will come to an end.
Wow, I'm just going to segue straight to Clement. You can pick up that thread, Clement, or ask your question.
Okay, thanks, Edwin. Very, very interesting, very inspiring, and I'm glad that you have survived it all. And your talk reminded me of one that was given here, PhD candidate some years back about Madagascar, about this conservation where the locals had been forbidden to go into a forest area, and yet they didn't have anything to survive on. So there was that big dilemma. And so seeing how you went about it really was very interesting. My question is two short questions. One is you did mention about you plan to expand the habitat for the gorillas, and I'm just wondering how that is going to impact the agricultural land for the people. And the second is, now that you are here, who's in charge there?
Thank you for the questions. One, let me start with the expansion. So the habitat expansion is a big project. It's a government project, almost over $200 million. The government is investing over $200 million with the Buffett Foundation to expand the park. And as I said, most of these projects are coming out of what I would say philanthropic way of doing things, of saying we need more space for the gorillas, which is true, but also not looking at the other side of the community. So what they're trying to do is to get the land from the community, put it on the park, pay them, and they go. So the question is, where do they go? And what happens to that land? Because that's a very productive land for potatoes in the region. So it's still ongoing right now with NGOs and the government and Buffett Foundation doing that. And if they do, even that community where presented is going to move as well, because that whole land is going to be put back to the park. Why? Because now there's more attachment, there's more plight, there's more voice for the gorillas beyond the voice of the community. So the question is, who is going to raise the voice of the community to make sure that they get the best out of the worst idea, if it is. So in time, how do we make sure that we balance conservation expansion of the ideas and the community expansion of development? And what happens when the land is gone? Because that means they don't have a voice anymore. You're not the neighbor, you're not adjacent to the park, that's all taken. So it's a project that is ongoing. Frankly speaking, I don't have a hand in that. And I tried to do that and failed in my own way and decided to leave it at that. But it's a project that has more voices on international level, on a national level, and involves a lot of money and philanthropy. And because of that, it's going to be hard to bring those voices to play. Right now, there's a lot of, if you have been following, Ellen DeGeneres is building a campus around there as well. It's next to the park. So there's more now people coming all over the world to give voice to the gorillas, but we don't have as much voices for the communities, for the people. And that's where the challenge of the expansion is going to be, how we integrate the needs of the people to the needs of the park and expansion of the gorillas. How that happens, I'm not quite sure about it. It's going to be tough. Two, on who is in charge, one of the things I did while I started was to train people, train communities, send them to school, go to colleges, go to universities, and come back and assign them roles in the communities. Because this, I built it as a community program. And every time I tried to get myself out, because I wanted the communities to succeed, and then we learn from that as an example. And what happened is when I went away to do my PhD, what was interesting that the project actually did much better than when I was there. So the communities now were willing to do more, even when it was about, they would fail. So then I come in every year, we sit down, have a community village meeting, and go through some of the activities and see what they have failed, achieved, and so forth. And I let them take lead in that. So what I do is to train the community leaders, the project managers we have that are coming from the community, the accountants, they have the bank accounts, they have programs, the women bank their money, they withdraw, they give reports. So what I do is to read reports and advise, and I try to take as minimum as I can until when I go for the General Assembly that we have every year. And every time I go, then we present, we go through that. And it has been phenomenal that the little you can do to build the capacity of the community and what they can do thereafter. And this has been amazing to see the young people that we started educating then, finished college, and they are back in the community leading the programs. So every time they present, I'm amazed at how much a community can achieve and do when given a chance.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you, Clement. Those are two really great questions. Cheryl, over to you.
So, I deal with representation and culture and so on and so forth, Edwin. So thank you very much for this, but it's got me thinking about a lot of things that are more about these issues of representation and culture and longer lasting sustainability. So I'm wondering, is this going to be sustained generationally without it becoming a human zoo? Okay. So in terms of people becoming models of this culture that's reified, that's never changed, and tourists coming from abroad to see people in their quote unquote primitive state, for one thing. And, Rwanda has become like this space of globalization, of technological development. It's touted as the place for, super internet technology, the super highway of Africa nowadays. And it's brought in people from all around the world for development. And so I'm also wondering too, is there any connection and connectivity, that is going on in terms of, thinking again, generationally, because this is where we're all kind of moving, as human beings across the spaces, so.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting question. One is to start with the last one. I like when you use the term touted. That's very important.
Touted, yes, I know.
Because in many aspects, you have two different reports on the same issue differently. And that has been also criticized in different ways in terms of how we do that, because the idea is that some things have worked and some things have not worked, depending on how we showcase them or put a PR tag on them for different reasons. But on the model itself, what I did with that, I was cognizant of that because I visited different countries, Tanzania, Kenya, Botswana, when that community-based natural resource tourism was starting, is that in the tourism industry, we want to keep the community backward for us to sell as a tourism product. The Maasai, so everyone has to be a Maasai, dressed like a Maasai to sell, even when they are not. So one of the things we did was to have a culture center so that people and tourists are not going into people's homes to invade their privacy or go into there visiting them as tourism products. So the culture village becomes a center, an area where they can display the culture, but not necessarily who they are or who they have become in different phases. For example, what we didn't have in the area, like some model villages in different parts of Africa, is they don't want to have electricity, for example, internet or cell phones, because those display to tourists that this is a developed community. Therefore, it does not feed into their ego or predefined notions of what a community in Africa is. So what we have done, for example, we have electricity, we have now water, we have internet, we have cell phones. How communities do is come in the center, and not everyone, the poachers who are dancers, those who are doing activities that the people can see as part of our culture as a display, but then the other activities and the community is able to go on. Otherwise, we were trying, at the time, we're seeing people, tourists, tour operators, taking tourists to people's homes. And for me, that's a violation of their rights. They shouldn't be violated to the extent that they are commodified as a tourism product. So when I started that, I was against that, and I got in trouble a little bit for that, getting tour operators, hotels, not to do that, because the communities cannot say no, they want the money. And just because they have the money, then I'm able to go into their private rooms and places and distract the activities that they do. And that's why we had, for example, with the gorillas, we have 1 hour. You see them, you just go away, they continue the activities. So in the culture village, tourists come in the culture village, and it's a village center for that, but not going into the communities and holding them ransom for the tourism development activities so that they display the ancient or the culture, who they are. No, this is the culture, you take part in that, but it continues to not to define them, because as you're saying, there are waves of change in the community. We cannot keep them, that because it's part of the culture. So that's part of of answering the question, is that we have well display, but the communities has continued to change or develop or not, depending on the processes, the flow of that over time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bronwyn, would you like to come in?
Mute. So just to follow on that, Edwin, one of my other questions was, hunting and success in hunting gives people social status, especially men. And it's tied to masculine identity. It's tied to pride and feeling good about oneself. And dancing for tourists culturally is often not a good substitute for that masculine identity. And in Indigenous communities here in North America, the removal of that hunting success and providing for your family and the way that supports masculine identity is attributed to some of the social problems that we see in Indigenous communities here, where men have lost purpose, have lost status, have lost some of their identity. So I'm curious if that's happening there and how you're navigating that.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it has, because we have a community called the Pygmies, the Batwa in Rwanda, who lived in the forest prior to making it a park in 1925. So around the 1930s, 40s, they were kicked out of the park and they were not given land. So they were just thrown outside the park and to survive like that. But for the generations, they lived in the forest, they survived on hunting, and that's it. So when they're kicked out, they became a problem. And one of the challenges has been all the time, they are still attached to that culture of bush meat. So even when they get, a chicken or goat, they go, no, it's not the same as the buffalo or the antelope. So, and when we do studies, ranger-based monitoring studies, we still see poaching of antelopes, of elephants, of buffaloes over time. So we still know that that attachment is still there. But what has happened is that most of these areas have been declared national parks and protected areas by the countries. So the communities don't have any chance. And outside that, for example, in Rwanda, it's not like Kenya or Tanzania where you can have conservancies and places where people can even hunt. It's that every inch of every meter is occupied. So there's no where they can hunt apart from parks and protected areas, which is also illegal. So that, because it was lost back then, over time, it has changed. The culture has changed, attachment to bushmeat has changed because there's no anywhere else they can do. We still have people who come from Rwanda and they go to hunt in the Congo because there's a way they can hunt there and not get caught or come back, and to bring in bushmeat. But still, the police, the rangers, the army, they will arrest them. So that has changed over time. What has not changed is having an alternative to the bushmeat. So without that alternative, at least to the minimum, then they still have to go to poach and look for bushmeat. So it's still a challenge because it's still attached to the culture and the culture is still there. It's changing over time with their children, because what was happening when we started seeing parents taking their kids to the forest to teach them how to hunt. Now it's not there because the kids are in schools. That has a little bit broken down. So the culture is changing like at that level. So their parents who are now old cannot take their kids to the park to teach them as they were taught before. So hunting in Rwanda is changing. In the Congo, it's still almost the same because we still see people, even in some parts of Uganda, we still have these places where people can hunt that are not gazetted as national parks, are forests or natural areas, that they can still do that. And we see that at a high level. But in places like Rwanda, where we don't have that natural space other than protected areas and parks where people can exercise their rights to hunt or can do that, it's really hard and it's breaking down.
Thanks so much for these exchanges. They're really, really great. Segun, your hand was up, went down, now it's back up again. So please come in.
Yeah, Edwin, thank you for your wonderful presentation. So actually, I have two questions for you. So the first one has to do with politics. So given the fact that any kind of social intervention, at least in my country, Nigeria, so often are read as a kind of political intervention. So my question is, the fact that the center has become a platform for the local folks to work together and exercise their agency, so at nation building. So do you think that that cultural intervention at any point in time has been perceived as a political intervention, given the political tension in Rwanda, the Hutu, the Tutsi tension. So has there been a time your intervention, though culturally, has been read to be a kind of political platform you are building for a kind of national recognition? So that's my first question. Then the second question is, given the COVID pandemic, so are you afraid for the sustainability of that center, that the center may not be sustainable, given the fact that if visitors don't come, so the center, the cultural center, the cultural village won't generate any income to sustain itself. So do you think the COVID pandemic affecting the future and sustainability of the cultural village in the near future?
Thank you. Thank you. Your first question, thanks for the question. The first one, yes, on different levels. One is, I will share just from my own story, my own experiences. One is you have dynamics in Africa where the young people are coming up and are threatening the old folks in terms of occupying the political space. You have a case in Uganda where we have Bobby Wine and President Museveni. But coming down to the villages, they see that in two ways. One, I had to navigate at three levels. One was at the village level, where you had the politics of Hutu, Tutsi, politics that were playing into that. And people wondering, why is he up? What is he up to? That's one question. What is he trying to do? So the idea was, I probably have political ambition. So I'm trying to galvanize and raise my base in the villages. I'm trying to show myself as, the Messiah, and then come and compete with other politicians. So I had that. Two, you don't even have to worry because they send their own people in the villages. They send their own spies to check on what is he up to, what is he saying. They want to know what is he saying, what is he doing. But also keep track on your own growth. What is he up to? He wants to challenge me in 10 years, 5 years. So the politician will keep an eye on you. So the question is, when that is misinterpreted, you end up losing your life. So that's where the threat level was at. And three, you have the development organizations who are not happy for you showcasing what can be done with minimum investment when they have been investing all this money for years and we don't see that much. So at those three levels, I knew my threat level and I was not worried about it. Even when I was told constantly that watch out, be careful, don't sleep in that house, it will be touched. And this community who were paid and told to do things, they will come and tell me that this is the threat and all that. So what I had done was the communities knew what I was there for and what I was doing. And we genuinely embraced each other. They took me as their own. And so every time I was there, I felt more love and loved than what I could ask for. But I knew that those who were threatened by their interpretation of what I'm up to, that I have nothing I can do to change that. And that was going all the time. And it was following me every time I knew that. So those are some of the hindrances that stop young people or people of goodwill from even doing things that they would have done in their home villages or places, because the threat level is so high. If you're not careful, you lose your life because somebody thinks you're trying to prep your journey to be, a politician or take over his office or something like that. Even when I kept saying I'm not interested in politics, no, because why are you interested in these people? They're not your brothers. They're not your sisters. This is not your home village where you grew up. You are Tutsi, they are Hutu. Why? There's something in it for you, and they have to find out. So that's embracing, knowing that you're doing it for love, that you care is not there. Everything that you do is tagged on something. You're either preparing your journey for your political ambition, or there's a benefit. He has been given money from donors and we don't know. He's selling these people and the programs to get money to enrich himself. Even when they were not seeing anything, I was spending my own money. I was not getting from anywhere. And that one they knew because they tried that, they failed. I was making my own money, putting it back into the programs to do that. So yes, to your question is those three levels, the threat level is so high that even some other people, to be honest with you, I went more than what I thought I was planning to do. And I was adamant about that, even the threat levels, because I knew that if I don't do this, who will? And I did it because I knew that was what they needed to do at the time, because I knew what the communities was going through, and I knew what I went through as a child, and I didn't want them to face or feel the same way I felt when I was young. So with that genuine background, there was nothing that would have threatened me to stop either way. Your second question, yes, because one of the things I said, this was built around tourism. But what it helped us to do was to develop micro enterprises of what communities can do. Selling agribusiness, being part in agribusiness, selling their crafts, starting a business. So it developed the capacities of communities to be resilient, to adapt to different challenges, and tap into different sources of what they can do. It's not the same as tourism, because now without tourism, the culture center has been, for the whole year, 0 tourists, the same as the country. We lost over 20 million revenues in the Guerra tourism alone. So the community has lost a lot of money and time on that. But what they still do, they use the center as a place for their discussion, for their play, for interaction and stuff like that, even at a minimum level because of COVID. So the future of that is going to depend on what other ideas we bring forth. We are trying to figure out what else can we do. Every week we have discussions at the community level. Last week I had discussions via Skype and WhatsApp with them, video. What can we do? What else can we do? We don't have tourism. It's not going to be there for the next 5 years. What is it that we can do? And everything was coming back to agribusiness, agriculture. Let's put more into agriculture. Let's make sure we have food, because now we're talking about food and health. We're not concerned more about even the enterprises. How can we communities make sure they're healthier, they have food, and then we start looking at some of those ideas. And one of the ways I'm trying to push more is to do research. I have more students going there. They go to the community. We have students who have been doing research, studying, and then they come up and give us more ideas on what we can do. And the idea is that the whole community and other people will have to sit down and figure out, just like we did then, find out other ways on how we can sustain our program, not necessarily the culture village, but the community in its entirety.
Wow, I hope that there are ways that Penn State can play a role in this and help and do something, and that you can be the conduit somehow, getting that to happen. If there's any other questions, this is the last chance, I think. Okay, well, Edwin, thank you so much. This was an incredible hour and a half of the week. It really has transported me, at least from my room here, to many other places. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing